Are we reaching the limit of Homo sapiens? I mean, if you look at the world records of traditional sports like marathon running, cycling, and even weightlifting, the pattern is clear. World records are still being broken, but the pace of progress is clearly slowing down. We are pushing our physiology against a ceiling. But then a new category emerged: hybrid sports like CrossFit and especially HYROX, where strength and endurance are combined in one single test. And the question is, can these athletes redefine what the true human limit is, or do the same biological and physical constraints apply? And in this video, I will break down how close hybrid athletes are compared to specialists in their true discipline. And more importantly, what we can learn from these limits to try to push the boundaries of human potential just that little bit further. Super excited for this one. I think you will get a lot out of this video for your own training. So without further ado, let's go straight into it. Hi everyone, welcome back to another wod-science video. My name is Gomar. I'm a senior scientist at ETH Zurich, based in Switzerland. And for the last decade or so, I studied and taught different aspects of exercise physiology, and my goal now is to bring some of that science that I learned back to you guys. World records have always fascinated me. I mean, they illustrate the ultimate expression of human integrated biology through speed and strength performances. And if you look at some of the best tracked world records, for example, in athletics, in track and field, for example, an 800-meter high jump and a shot put, you see that from the 1900s, approximately when they started tracking this, towards the 1980s, there was almost a linear increase in performance. And then magically, since the 1980s, there seems to be a clear plateau where there's still some progress, but very, very little. And even that is with all the introduction of the performance enhancing drugs like testosterone or EPO and so on, they still really didn't manage to improve by the same extent as, for example, in the 40s and the 50s. Same happens for the true test of endurance, I would say, which is the marathon. A lot of people have been writing about the marathon and how to break, for example, the 2-hour barrier in the males, but you see almost the same pattern. Initially, a strong decline in time, so an improvement in performance, and then since whatever the 2000, 1900 approximately, there's this decay in performance or improvement in performance as you would expect. And for example, if you want to read up a little bit more related to how and when the 2-hour barrier will be broken, this paper claims or modeled that this will happen in 2032, and this will be a 1 out of 10 chance that the 2-hour barrier will be broken. Let's see if it's actually true. I think it might actually happen a little bit earlier, but who knows what the future holds. But clearly what we see from the last couple of graphs is that there is some kind of a slowing in progress in the world records of more traditional sports. Pretty fascinating to me. So then we started to invent new sports, I would call them, right? The hybrid sports. I think the OG here is CrossFit. Since 2007, there's a competitive scene in CrossFit where strength, endurance, agility, skill, everything basically is combined. And then most specifically, and certainly also HYROX, because HYROX, in contrast to CrossFit, has a fixed time or a fixed event. Every race is almost exactly the same, at least that's what they try to accomplish, and you can then track progress through time. So are we also getting this decaying or slowing of progress in hybrid sports? That's a little bit the question that I will try to answer in the next couple of minutes. Because not so long ago, I collaborated with the University of Basel, and we wanted to know, when you have CrossFit athletes, like top athletes, I'm talking about semi-finalist games athletes or the top percentile of the open, so well prepared, well trained CrossFit athletes, and you test them in the lab via conventional testing methods. So for example, an exercise test to exhaustion on the bike that has been reproduced a lot of times in other labs as well with other athletes, and then also some strength tests, for example, a maximal isokinetic leg extension or a mid-thigh pull, that also have been done by other researchers in other labs. And how do their scores compare to their respective specialists? Let me explain by this little spider chart. So what you see here is on the outer edges, so the circle, the black circle, is the 100th percentile of an elite cohort in that specific discipline. So if you look at the right side, is going to be the endurance athletes, the VO2 peak, as well as the critical power. For example, we took a cohort of elite cyclists that had 85 to 90 even VO2 max, so really, really well-trained athletes. And then on the left down is all the strength part. For example, counter movement, jump height, so how high you can jump, explosive power, then maximal isometric leg extension, as I explained, and maximal isometric mid-thigh pull force, so how forceful you can pull from the mid-thigh position. And you can clearly see from this graph, the green is always going to be the males, in this case, the males CrossFit athletes, the elite ones, so really the top 10 of our cohort, so the games athletes. And you see that CrossFit is kind of a strength biased sport, because they are actually pretty close when you look at the strength parameters to elite weightlifters. So I didn't tell you yet that the strength parameters were obviously pulled from elite weightlifters. So they're very close to their like 95 percentile, to their counterparts, to their colleagues from the weightlifting condition. But then endurance, pure cardiovascular capacity and endurance, like VO2 max and also critical power, which is close to your threshold power, is very far off of typical endurance cyclists. Interesting to know, I think, for also for yourself, if you are training in CrossFit, where you have to focus on and what is basically the prerequisite of doing well in a CrossFit event. And I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into this, because this is, we comparing our CrossFit athletes with a specific test in the lab, with also the weightlifters with a specific test in the lab. But what we really want to know is, how far are they in terms of weightlifting performance or endurance, actual endurance performance, not just the things that we test in the lab, but actual, for example, the races. And then I looked at, for example, just one of the many things we can look at is the snatch, the 1RM snatch. And we know from 2023, maybe you remember, there was a 1RM snatch programmed in the CrossFit Games. So you would think that the best athletes will pull heavy weights there. And indeed, Tola Morakinho and Bronislav Olenkovic, very famous weightlifter slash CrossFitter, pulled 315 pounds in competition, in a CrossFit competition. I mean, you can always correct me in the comments, but that is to date the heaviest weight lifted in a CrossFit competition by a CrossFitter, right? And if you compare that with Jason Lopez, who is an Olympic weightlifter, right? He pulled, actually not so long ago, in October 2025, so a couple weeks ago, he pulled 177 kilos or 390 pounds in competition. Obviously, after a taper, you cannot completely compare that with a CrossFitter, but still, that is 23% higher than a CrossFitter, right? So still there's a big discrepancy here. The same for the women, almost the same numbers. I didn't take the snatch. I took, for example, now the back squat, which is rather like a raw strength event. And indeed, you see almost the same. We have Miriam van Roo. She is obviously a very good CrossFitter. I think she has a massive potential to actually win the games maybe later. That is just between you and me here. But anyway, in the CrossFit Games, there was a max back squat event, and she squatted a nice 360 pounds, which is almost my 1RM, so pretty crazy numbers here. But that is still 27% lower, so to speak, than a true power lifter whose job is to just lift heavy weights and not do all the crazy gymnastic skills and endurance skills, right? So you still also have quite a big discrepancy between the top scores in CrossFit compared to the top scores, for example, in powerlifting. And the same holds true for endurance. I think that's very clear. For example, this is a lactate curve of an CrossFit Games athletes that I tested during a bike test to exhaustion, right? Where every 3 minutes the intensity was increased, and you measure lactate to understand their thresholds. And in this case, the threshold on the Concept 2 bike for this athlete was 290 watts, which is very close to the critical power that we measured in our study, and that is like 3.8 to 4.0 watts per kilogram. All right, that is way lower than the 6.5 to 7.0 that you see in endurance athletes, right? Like it's almost 50% of that. So pure endurance capacity, CrossFit athletes are way below. Then you also have the third aspect that we cannot really measure, which is the anaerobic capacity. And I think there CrossFit athletes are absolutely the best in the world. But that is for this video not super important. But as we know, or have already indicated, CrossFit is unknown and unknowable. I mean, there are basically the masters in non-specialization. They have to be good literally at everything. When you have a Gauss curve of everything, for example, weightlifting, pull-ups, handstand push-ups, but also back squat, and a 5K row, they always need to be in the middle of the curve. They don't have to excel in anything. They have to try to be in the middle of the curve to be the best over a long period of time in a CrossFit competition, for example. I think a very good example here is Justin Medeiros. He's an amazing athlete who's usually always in the middle of the curve, and therefore when he doesn't have any weaknesses, that's how he gets better. But what happens when we take away some of the high skill, high strength events, and we rather put strength and endurance into one race? And then obviously HYROX comes in. But before I go on and explain whether HYROX or the times in HYROX are still in this linear progression phase or already decaying in performance, and how athletes like you who's watching this video can push to their ceiling, which strategies they can use to push towards their physiological ceiling, let me quickly explain about the different training plans we have. I think it's pretty clear from all the videos I make that me and my team are very passionate about training and how to integrate physiology into training. And therefore, we made 4 different training plans that can help you to get towards your next goal, being it in a local throwdown, being it in a HYROX competition. So for example, for HYROX, we think about the background of the athlete. We have 2 different plans. One would be the speed and power, where athletes from a more endurance background can jump in. It will be a little bit higher volume and more emphasis, certainly in certain phases of the season, certainly the building phase, more emphasis on strength and strength for the different stations, most specifically. And then we also have the engine, and the engine is more for CrossFit or strength athletes who want to jump into HYROX and don't have necessarily the aerobic capacity, as I just explained. Usually the aerobic capacity is definitely lacking in CrossFit athletes, and therefore we tailor that specific program to those kind of athletes. And then we also have plans for the functional fitness athlete, the CrossFit athlete. One would be for competitors, the compete program. Obviously this will be high volume training 6 times per week, also a little bit of zone 2, but mostly high intensity training where strength and metcons and skill are combined, usually in one session. So I would say very specialized and good training with linear progressions depending on which season or which part of the season. And then you also have the hybrid approach to CrossFit functional fitness. And there we have one day that will be strength, mostly strength and powerlifting, and then the next day will be skill and conditioning and metcons, also using high intensity and low intensity workouts. If you're interested in trying this out, just trying a 7-day free trial, scan the QR code that is popping up right now. It helps the channel, obviously. It helps me keep making all these videos and spending all the time, and also it will help you to get towards your goal more quickly, getting fit, getting healthy through functional fitness and high intensity sports. The link to the training plans is also in the first link in the description. Thank you for that. All right, HYROX. Yeah, the question is HYROX still in this linear phase of progression, or are we already flattening out? I'm actually quite interested in this because we know in endurance sports, we're clearly at the, let's say, the plateau phase. We also know that in strength sports, this is happening. But what happens if you put them together? Are we in this kind of linear phase? And then I pulled the data from the last 6 years, I think 6 seasons, 7 seasons of HYROX, of the World Championships, or at least at that time, the most important competition. And I took for the males and the females, the top athlete. For example, in the beginning years, this was always Hunter McIntyre for the males. But for the females, it always changed, by the way, if you look at the history. And then I also took the top 10, the average of the top 10 of that year in the HYROX Elite 15 or the elite discipline. And you see, just for example, look at the winning times, right? For the males and certainly for the females, we're still in this linear progression. You see also this bump in 2021 and 2022. That is because COVID, there were less races, and I think there were a couple of races in America. So that's maybe something that you can kind of omit. But certainly the last couple of years, there's still this linear increase in progression. It would be interesting that this would be a request from me to you, the viewer, because I don't have the capacity to do this, to pull the data from all the races from the last couple of years and plot the progression of the performance of maybe the top 10 or the always the top athletes, but also of the average athletes of everyone, because we have so many athletes doing HYROX now. How is the progression there? Are we also decaying, or is this still in the linear phase? I'm actually very interested in this because, yeah, obviously HYROX is such a new sport, but it's very structured, so we can actually put some data, put some mathematics on this, some modeling on this, and then maybe someone can come out with a formula or a modeling trajectory to understand when the elites would break the 50 barrier in the pro race. Right now we're sitting at 53, whatever, 25 or something for the world record for the males. When do you think, according to the modeling of many data, would be the time to break the 50 barrier? Will this be in 2 years, or will this be in 15 years? That's something I think you can do. So if you're interested and you have some free nights, some free evenings, that would be super cool. And also, if you have that data, definitely send it to me. Maybe I can discuss it on a previous video. But still, that said, that's all nice. The best HYROX athletes still will never beat a 5K world champion, in my opinion. Like, even though they are more endurance biased and they are, let's say, less strength biased and like a CrossFit athlete, they will nevertheless not have the same aerobic capacity as a world champion. For example, I try to plot this here. When you look at the 5K time of a top Elite 15 racer now, like I'm talking about the males here, on the 5K, we're looking at 20 kilometers an hour, around 15 minutes per 5K. That is still significantly below the 12:35 of Joshua Kipchoge. That is a world record, the current world record in the 5,000 meters, right? So even though we might still be in this linear phase, also here we are looking at a ceiling, we are looking at a hybrid ceiling, so to speak. So the question is, I think the most relevant question of the whole video here is, why will there always be a ceiling? I mean, I made this graph and I made the fact that, yes, the top HYROX will never beat the world record in the 5K, but why is this? And I think 3 reasons pop up that I think you can also use for your own training. One is training distribution or training specificity. What do I mean with that? Let me read 3 quotes from 3 of my favorite researchers or coaches in the endurance world. The first one is Stefan Seiler. He is a really well-known researcher in the endurance world. So if you are interested in this stuff, if you're interested in endurance research, please type in on Perplexity or PubMed or whatever, Stefan Seiler, and read his work. Really good research. And what he said, specificity is king. The body adapts to the work it is asked to do, not to what we hope it will do. This, I think, is very important for many people in the hybrid world, right? Specificity is key. Then we have Olaf Alexander Boo. I've talked a lot about him also on Instagram. He is basically my scientific hero because he's very open about everything he does. He does very groundbreaking research, not only in the lab, but also with his athletes. He's a Norwegian coach. Check the Norwegian podcast, very good podcast, where he talks a lot about his secret. And he, as I said, he's the coach of Christian Blumenfeld, Gustav Eden, top triathletes, like best in the world. If it's not specific, it's not useful. The closer the training is to what you want to perform, the more effective it becomes, right? And then we have David Bishop. David Bishop is a colleague of mine. He is a researcher talking or writing a lot and doing a lot of research about mitochondria. Also really good stuff about the in-depth understanding of endurance exercise. And what he says, I think this is the best one. Training is about sending the right signal. And he talks about signaling in the muscles here. Not just any signal. The signal must match the adaptation you want. He wrote this in Journal of Physiology in 2011. So why is this important? And everything what I will say in the video later is depending on this little graph. When you have a marathoner, that's actually a very hard word to pronounce, someone who does marathon, like an athlete who does marathon, most of his time spent will be endurance training, running, maybe some other modalities, but most, let's say 90 to 95% will be running, endurance training, and a little bit of strength to also have the adaptation of his tendons and maybe also his running economy. Then you have a HYROXer. The HYROXer will spend less time training because its overall intensity will be higher, so he cannot do that much training volume. And then a large part will be endurance, running, ergs, whatever. Some will be a mix. Hopefully not that much. I don't think it's the best approach to do a lot of mixed modality work. And then some will be strength, pure strength, whatever, back squats, front squats, kettlebell, goblet squats, and so on. And then and see on the right, you have the CrossFitter who does basically everything, strength, mixed, and some endurance. That is the reason why the hybrid athletes, that is the main reason why the hybrid athletes will never become as good as a specific specialist in their respective discipline. Simply training volume. He will spend less time, for example, a HYROXer, running compared to a 5,000 meter runner or a marathon runner. Very simple. And this leads us to the second reason that is very much related to the first reason, and that will be the central limitation. Now we're going to be a little bit more nerdy and more physiology, so bear with me, but I think that's why you're here. That's why you are following this channel. Take a look at the beautiful Röntgen pictures of two hearts. On the left side, you have the non-athlete, and on the right side, you have the athlete. And I think you can see immediately that the athlete heart in general is larger, and most specifically, the left ventricle, the ventricle that pushes out the oxygenated blood via the aorta towards the muscles, is larger, is bigger. That is a typical expression of an athlete's heart. So when you do a lot of endurance training, like a lot of running, cycling, rowing, and so on, there will be something that we call volume load. There will be a long period of time within the athlete's life, basically, that there is a lot of venous return, that there's a lot of blood pumping through the system. I mean, these guys, they train 10, 20 hours of endurance training, and this will lead to more sarcomeres that are added in series, and this will generate a larger, let's say, balloon or a larger left ventricle. Good. So that's something that we know already quite some time. And then you also have more hypothetical, I mean, it hasn't been shown that much, or at least it's not that straightforward. You also have, we call this pressure load. And that is when the heart has to push really hard against a pressure. For example, when you do strength training, we know, I actually talked about this in 2 videos ago, where we explained how different heart rate zones are maybe not exactly optimal for functional sports. But what we know is when you do strength training, that the blood pressure increases and the heart has to like literally push harder. And this will lead to what we call concentric hypertrophy, a thickening of the wall, of the heart wall, and not necessarily an expansion of the cavity. And that is important to notice because we know that strength athletes and hybrid athletes who do quite a lot of strength, a part of their training will not be volume load, but rather pressure load. So the adaptation to the heart is not necessarily bad or something. It's just not optimal for the maximal amount of oxygen and blood that can be pumped throughout the whole system. It is also optimized to pump blood against a resistance, which is happening, for example, when you do heavy thrusters, back squats, or a sled push, for example. So that's why a hybrid athlete will never have exactly the same central adaptations, heart adaptation, as a pure endurance athlete. And then we have also, obviously you can think about it, the third reason will be the peripheral limitations. And peripheral means at the site of the muscle. I've talked about this in a previous video already, where I explained how bigger muscles are not always optimal for endurance, because there is a physical constraint on how many or how much capillaries or small blood vessels around a muscle fiber you can build with hypertrophying muscle. What do I mean with that? Let's say you have a small muscle fiber, right? Like a typical endurance athlete. And then he does a lot of strength training, and the fiber increases in cross-sectional area, right? So you get bigger muscles, basically, very simple. It's very simple physics that the perimeter of the fiber grows slower than the cross-sectional area. This means that you can physically add on a relative base less capillaries around the fiber with a growing muscle. This is what we call a constraint hypothesis, and this means that in theory, bigger muscles have less capacity to be oxygenated by the different or by the small blood vessels around the muscle fiber. Makes complete sense, right? Like big athletes will always have a harder time to oxygenate their muscles compared to thin endurance type athletes that you see running around like crazy in the Olympics, for example. Good. So 3 different reasons why I think hybrid athletes will never reach that ceiling: central adaptations, peripheral limitations, and also just simple training distribution and specificity of training. Cool. As a summary, if you're still here, thank you for that. Really cool that you watch until the end of the video, because here I try to give you some input on, okay, we know maybe that you cannot reach that ceiling. That's very, I would say, inevitable, but still, how can you as a hybrid athlete or someone who likes strength and endurance, hybrid athlete, I know some people get triggered by that word, but someone who does both strength and endurance in HYROX, in CrossFit, doesn't matter which type of training you do, how can you reach that performance ceiling? And then this is a little bit of theory, but give you maybe some ideas to test. We can think about it as technology and monitoring on one side, how we can improve that part. And then also physiology and nutrition. I will go over it pretty quickly, but here are some factors. First of all, wearables. We have now the technology of NIRS to measure oxygen in the muscle, but we also have the technology, for example, with WOD-motions, I've talked about this on the channel a lot, where we can, with an IMU, assess the movement patterns in functional movement. So we can better understand pacing, we can better understand power output of functional movement. So that would be a very big help for hybrid athletes to improve their, let's say, hybrid performance. And then, yeah, based on that, we can have more data-driven training plans, actually understand, okay, what is the external load on the body doing that specific workout, external load, not only internal load, but external load, and how can we integrate that into athlete performance. Then we can have more advanced testing procedures. Using new wearables, we can come up with new testing procedures that are not necessarily the same as typical endurance or strength tests, but rather hybrid tests to understand progression through time, for example. And then leaning on to that is we can integrate that into better platforms. I mean, now all the apps that are around now are kind of like whiteboards, but maybe we can use some of that data and integrate that into a platform to have like a training peaks, so to speak, for hybrid athletes. And then also, yeah, equipment, obviously. Now we have shoes. I mean, this is opening a whole can of worms, so I won't go too much into detail here, but manufacturers are racing, and I know this firsthand, to make the best hybrid shoe specifically for HYROX, where you can also run really fast in, but not only running, because they're all specialized in running, but you also need to have good shoes for wall balls, thrusters, lunges, burpee broad jumps, and so on. And how can you integrate both parameters into one optimal shoe that definitely will improve performance, just like the Nike Vaporfly did in 2017 with the running scene. And then physiology and nutrition, something that is underused by many of the athletes in hybrid sports, in my opinion. Altitude training, certainly for HYROX, super interesting to integrate altitude training with a tent, or maybe even going to St. Moritz or the mountains to improve performance there. If you're interested in learning more on how to use altitude training for endurance sports, leave a comment. If there's a lot of animo and interest in this, I will definitely touch upon this, because I did my PhD in altitude training. Then also heat adaptation. Many of the rooms or the big venues in HYROX are pretty warm, certainly in the summer. So how can you adapt to the heat, not only for heat competitions in heat, but also competitions in the cold? And then optimized nutrition. We know now from actually pretty recent research that athletes can benefit with large amount of carbohydrates during endurance events. Could be, for example, multiple glycolytic events for a CrossFit competition, but also for HYROX, right? How many carbs, which type of carbs you can ingest. We know much more of that now compared to whatever 10, 15 years ago. And how can you apply that to hybrid races? That's something we can definitely still work on and use that to push the whole ceiling. And then the last part would be a little bit more specific about the interference effect. How is the interference effect happening in hybrid sports? So not conventional, you do first back squats and then you do your whatever bike or run work. No, how is this actually interfering into a compromised running workout? Should you program those kind of workouts far away from your strength or far away from your endurance? There's really not that much known about this, and this would definitely help to better structure training plans for hybrid athletes. Cool, I think I said enough in this video. If you appreciate the content and you value the information that I shared here and some of my thoughts related to hybrid sports, please go ahead and take 2 seconds of your time to like the video and also subscribe to the channel. My goal is to get to 30,000 subscribers at the end of the year. I'm actually getting pretty close now, so if you are not subscribed yet, please do so. And if you want to learn more on the science of fitness, CrossFit, HYROX, functional sports, strength, endurance, all that good stuff, have a look at the video that is recommended by YouTube itself right now. Thank you for watching, have a nice remainder of your day, and see you in the next one. Ciao.